Okay, so before we look at cubic equations, let's take our mind back to our last lesson where we were looking at quadratic equations, and let's just refresh our memory on that. So a quadratic equation is an equation where one of the terms in the equation is raised to the power of 2. So over here we've got this h squared, it's h raised to the power of 2. So that is what makes this equation a quadratic equation. Now, the way we solve a quadratic equation, it's pretty much the same as how we would solve any regular equation. It's just that when we get down to just having our isolated h squared over here on the left-hand side, we then have another step, which is getting rid of that power there. So we need to perform the inverse operation of squaring, and the inverse of squaring is square rooting. So that's what we'll do when we get to the end. But first of all, we just treat it like a regular equation. So we need to isolate the h squared, get rid of all these other terms around it. So multiply both sides by 5. 26 times 5 is 130. We need to get rid of this 3. And we're left with h squared is equal to 130 divided by 3, which is 43 and 1/3. Okay, so now we've isolated the h squared. We just need to get rid of this power here. So as I said, we need to take the square root of both sides. So square root of h squared, that will just cancel out the power. So we're just left with h. And on the right hand side, we need to take the square root of 43 and 1/3. But remember, when we take the square root, there will be two answers because you'll have the positive square root and the negative square root, and they both work. So we need to remember that we're going to have plus or minus the square root of 43 and 1/3. So over here, we're left with h. And over here, we're left with plus or minus the square root of 43 and 1/3. And if the question asks you to leave it in exact form or surd form, then you would just leave it like this. If it asks you to give your answer as a decimal, then you can work out what the square root of 43 and 1/3 is, and the answer will be plus or minus 6.5828 da da da. Or they might ask you to round it to 1 decimal place or something like that. So you've got to pay attention to the question and see if they're asking you to leave it in exact or surd form like this, or if they want an approximation or a decimal answer like this. So this isn't exact, so you might even like to write approximately because it's approximately equal to that decimal. All right, so that's quadratic equations. I think we're all pretty confident with that. Now we're going to move on to some simple cubic equations. So straight away we can see that we've got a term raised to the power of 3. And that's the only difference really. In this case, we've got a term raised to the power of 3, which makes it a cubic equation. And before the quadratic equations, they were raised to the power of 2 only. So what we've got here is x cubed, which is kind of the same as saying x times x times x is equal to 8. And you might be able to look at this one straight away and say, okay, well, what number multiplied by itself another 2 times gives you 8? And you might be able to say straight away, oh, well, it's 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And then you know that the cubed root of 8 is 2. So you don't really need to put it into your calculator or anything like that. You can just see straight away that your answer is x equals 2. Now, we've only got one solution to this equation, whereas with the quadratic equations, we had 2 solutions for a lot of our problems. And can you see the reason why? Let's see. Why don't we have plus or minus 2? Why don't we have minus 2? Does minus 2 work? So minus 2 times minus 2 gives you 4, positive 4. But then we need to times by minus 2 again, which gives you minus 8. It doesn't give you 8. So if you've got a positive number, then when you cube that number, your result will be a positive number. And if you've got a negative number, when you cube that result will be a negative number. So there is only one solution. If this is positive, then the cubed root will be positive, and if this is negative, the cubed root will be negative. So in this case, it's positive. We've got one answer, and it's positive as well. All right, let's try this one. So this one we might not be able to see straight away. We don't know what number multiplied by itself 2 more times gives you 729. And we can't really use our times tables for that because this number is far too large. So all we need to do is use our calculator and take the cubed root of both sides. Just how we were taking the squared root of the quadratic equations, we take the cubed root of the cubic equations. So we take the cubed root of both sides, and that undoes this power here. So we're just left with n equals the cubed root of 729. And you'll notice that there is only one solution, n equals 9. And that's really quite simple. It's only one step. And you can use your calculator for it. Up here, we've got just another step, really. Basically the same question, but we need to isolate the z cubed first. We want to get that on its own, and then we can take the cubed root of both sides. So we just want to get rid of this denominator. So that leaves us with z cubed is equal to 77. Now we need to undo this power here. We want to get rid of the power. So we need to cube root it. Take the cubed root of both sides. Over here we're left with z because that just undoes the power. And over here we're left with the cubed root of 77, and there's only going to be one answer, and the answer will be positive because this is positive. So you can leave it like this because it doesn't give you a whole number, it actually gives you a decimal. So we've got z is equal to 4.254 blah blah blah. So if the question asks you to give it to one decimal place, it's going to be z is approximately equal to 4.3. And it's only the positive cubed root. There is no negative cubed root, because if we took 4.3, or we took this number, this big number, this large decimal, and we made it a negative and we said it was negative 4.3, and then we cube negative 4.3, we're going to end up with negative 77, which is not what we have here. So it has to be one answer, and it's the same sign as the number that you're taking the cubed root of. Okay, this one here, we need to, again, isolate y cubed. So we'll just treat it like a regular equation. They cancel out, and we're left with y cubed is 1029 divided by negative 3, which is negative 343. And now we just want to get y on its own. We don't want this power, so we need to take the cubed root of both sides. Now this time we're taking the cubed root of a negative, so we know that our solution is going to be negative as well. One solution, and it's a negative solution. So the cubed root of negative 343 is negative 7. It's a perfect whole number. So even if they ask you to write this in exact form, you don't have to leave it like that, because this is exact. It's a whole number. It's not approximated at all. So that's how you do cubic equations. You're just using the cubed root button on your calculator instead of the square root button. So I haven't got the same calculator as you right now. Mine is second function and this button, but I think on your calculator, yours is the second function and then the square root button that you have. And you can just read above it. It should say cubed root just above it.